What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. In today's video, I'll be going over the best second-year running backs, who they are, why I like them, and why some of them are just fantastic picks in fantasy this season. Before we start, gotta do the stat of the day. Yesterday, there was no stat. It was Mock Draft Monday, and I sometimes forget on those. But today's stat: which quarterback tied Lamar Jackson with the most rush attempts inside the 5-yard line? All right, let's talk about some second-year running backs. And first up is Josh Jacobs. He's coming off over 1,300 yards and 7 touchdowns through just 13 weeks last season, finishing as the running back 14 in points per game, currently being taken as the running back 10 in drafts. Jacobs will be 22 all season. That makes him younger than Keyshawn Vaughn, younger than Joshua Kelly, and the same age as Zach Moss. If you don't know, those are rookies this year. The positives for Jacobs are that he looked incredible as a rookie. He was 8th in yards per carry after contact. He was 3rd in explosive runs. He was 2nd in broken tackles, 2nd in elusiveness rating, and he was fantastic in pass protection. But everyone knows this. Everyone knows that Jacobs is an incredible running back. The problem that people bring up, and is a very real problem, is the targets. Both Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington had more targets than him last season, and it wasn't by like 1. It was by a pretty decent margin. He only averaged 2 targets per game, and that's going to limit anyone's upside. This season, Washington's gone. But they brought in Devontae Booker, they brought in Rod Smith, they draft Lynn Bowden, and they give Richard a 2-year extension. Now, they're not going to go into week 1 with all of these backs, right? It's too many running backs. They're not going to enter week 1 with that. So someone's getting cut. But they're probably going to have at least Jacobs, Richard, and Bowden, and that is still going to limit Jacobs' upside because Richard and Bowden are really good in the receiving game. Now, we don't know exactly how they're going to use Bowden, but you have to think that some of these targets out of the backfield that would have gone to Jacobs are going to go to Bowden. There's at least going to be some, so it is still a concern and something that limits his upside. But ultimately, I do think he's worth his draft price. He wasn't even that close to a full-time player last season, but he still averaged 20 touches per game. And again, was running back 14 in points per game. He doesn't need to play every third down snap to be a running back 1. He just needs a few more. And I do think there's a chance he gets that. But even if he doesn't, maybe the offense can just score a few more points. Because remember how hard it is for running backs to post elite numbers on bad offenses? Well, the Raiders scored less than 20 points per game last season. So if they can maybe approach league average, which I don't think is too much to ask. I mean, they did improve in the offseason, so I think they could be an average offense, or maybe they can get lucky in the touchdown department this season. And if that happens, then that's definitely going to benefit Jacobs. So I have him ranked right around where he's being taken this season. If you want to see exactly what that ranking is, you can always check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. David Montgomery, next up, being taken as the running back 24, so a low-end 2 to a high-end 3. Finishes rookie season with 16.7 touches per game, but was just the running back 32 in points per game. He was, I think, 25th overall, but points per game is really what matters. And that was largely a product of the situation. Chicago ranked 29th in yards per game, 31st in yards per play, 31st in points per play, 27th in touchdowns per game. They just couldn't move the ball. They couldn't score. So it's not shocking that their lead back did poorly. He was able to score 7 touchdowns, which you could look at in 2 ways. You could say, oh, that's pretty impressive that he scored 7 touchdowns on such a bad offense. But you could also look at that and be like, well, pretty lucky, right? I mean, if the offense isn't scoring very many touchdowns and you have 7, that's probably on the high end of variance, and maybe he gets a little bit less lucky this season. So multiple ways you can look at it. But one thing that there's only one way to look at is the yards per touch. They were dreadful. 4 yards per touch is very, very bad. And honestly, there's 2 ways people are looking at Montgomery this season. There's the camp that thinks he's bad, and they just don't care what volume he's going to get. He's not a good running back, and so he's not going to be good in fantasy. The other camp is like, well, maybe, yeah, maybe he's not that good, but also he's going to get, 270 to 280 touches, and volume's all we really care about, so we should probably be drafting him. I tend to fall into that school of thinking. I don't think it's fair to just write off his talent after one season, especially considering, like I said, how bad the offense was. I understand that 4 yards per touch is pathetic. I mean, over the last 20 years, there have been 311 running backs that have had at least 265 touches in a season. Only 31 of them had fewer yards per touch than Montgomery last season, so that puts him in the bottom 10%. So I get it. He was bad, but so was Cohen, right? I mean, Cohen was actually significantly worse in the receiving game, to the point where I don't even know why they were using him. I mean, he had 4.38 yards per target on 104 targets last season. I don't know how to explain to you how bad that is, other than saying there have been 43 running backs ever in the history of the NFL to have over 100 targets. So if we look back, since the beginning of the NFL, 43 running backs have had over 100 targets. Only 5 of them have ever had fewer than 5.1 yards per target, with just one being under 4.55, and that's Tariq Cohen last season at 4.38. That is absolutely dreadful. But again, it's not that I think Cohen is a bad player. I just think it's incredible how bad that offense was last season. They could not move the ball unless they were feeding Allen Robinson and then down the stretch Anthony Miller. But there's no way they're going to get worse than that. And it's pretty unlikely they stay that bad. The most likely scenario is that they improve this season. And if that happens, and they're still going to give Montgomery those 270, 280 touches, I'd be very surprised if he did not outperform his ADP. So I think he's being priced much closer to his floor than he is his ceiling. And those are the players I like to target. Miles Sanders, another running back. Wouldn't be a running back video if I didn't talk about Miles Sanders. Everyone who follows us knows that I love him this season, so I'm not going to go like super in depth here, but I want to remind you of all the main arguments as to why he's going to explode this year. Finishes running back 15 last season, despite 11 carries and 4 targets per game, while rushing for just 818 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. So right out of the gates, we know he's a guy that can be fantasy relevant on limited touches. Think like an Alvin Kamara. I'm not saying he's Alvin Kamara, but we know Alvin Kamara is not going to have 1,000 rushing yards. He's just not. Okay? He's not going to have all that many carries. But we know that the mixture of touchdowns, receptions, and carries with Kamara means he's probably going to be a top 5 running back. Sanders is similar. He's going to have the receptions, the rushing, and the touchdowns. And when you combine all of those things where he's not deficient in any area, that's great for fantasy because it raises his floor and his ceiling. They've also been very vocal about the fact that they're going to use him as the feature back, and they don't currently have a player that's even capable of challenging his workload. So if they were coming out and saying that, but then we looked at their roster and there was someone we were like, but he's good, right? He could definitely take a lot of work, then we'd be hesitant. But they don't have that. We know Boston Scott's there, but they want to use Boston Scott in the way that Boston Scott should be used. Crazy how that happens, right? The Eagles are smart. They know what Boston Scott is. He's a pass-catching back, not someone they want to give a big workload in early downs. He'll get carries, but he's not a guy they ever want to give 20 carries to. That's Miles Sanders. That's what they want his role to be. So if you want to look at the best sample that we have, it's weeks 14, 15, and 16 last season. These are the weeks where both these guys are healthy and they're both being used pretty much like we expect this season. In those weeks, Boston Scott averaged 31 snaps, 6 carries, 6 targets. That is what I expect this season. Targets probably a little bit high. I don't think he's going to get 6 targets a game, but that's like a typical week. Maybe Scott is in there for like 25 to 30 snaps, getting a few carries, around 5 carries, 5 targets. That's kind of how they want to use Boston Scott. Miles Sanders in those weeks played 54 snaps on average, 18 carries, 5.7 targets, scoring 9, 32, and 24 fantasy points in those games. Then, in their only playoff game last season, Sanders played 73% of the snaps while Scott played 28%, even with Sanders recovering from his ankle injury he suffered in week 17. This is the split, guys. It's going to be like 70 to 80% of the snaps for Sanders, and then Scott's going to get in there for the rest of them. And I cannot stress this enough. Miles Sanders will have a 3-down role and enough volume to be a mid-range running back 1 as long as he can stay healthy. And since we have no reason to think he can't stay healthy, he's going to be a great pick in fantasy. Darrell Henderson, up next, running back 45 off the board, which is roughly the 11th round. And I think Mike Clay said it best when he was describing Henderson's ADP. When he was looking at it, he's saying, all right, as a rookie last season, behind Gurley. So we knew Gurley was the guy, but the main concern was Gurley can't stay healthy. And so Henderson was so efficient in college. This offense was so efficient 2 seasons ago. It's just a dream matchup, and he's going to get the touches, right? So he was going in the 7th round because of that. Then this season, in year 2, no longer competing with Gurley. Now he's competing with a day 2 rookie. He goes in the 11th round. So it is much better to draft Henderson this season, but he goes 4 rounds later. This could end up being something similar to what we saw with Ronald Jones. So Jones had 30 touches in his rookie season and then had 203 touches last season, over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns after people had just written him off. They're like, well, he's just terrible. I mean, in reality, he was just very young and he just wasn't ready to handle a full workload. That might be the thing with Henderson. Maybe he just wasn't ready last season, but now he is. And he has much less competition this year as well. We do need to remember also that the Rams invested pretty much the same draft capital in both players. And that while Akers is a good prospect, and I think he'll be good in the league, there are definitely people who have raised concerns with how good he really is. It's probably a bit of a stretch to think that he's just going to walk in and take over Gurley's role completely, especially being a rookie in this offseason. Like, how many reps is he really going to have to just take over Henderson? I do think there are running backs that are going to get enough work to where they're going to take over. But to think in week 1 that Akers is just going to walk in and completely take over Henderson, that's just probably not going to happen. And so Henderson's going to have a chance this year. And to think that he's going as late as he is and he's going to have a chance, I don't know. That feels like a pretty good deal. So he's someone that if you're doing RB0, if you're just looking for upside at that portion of the draft, it's a pretty good name to consider because, yeah, the floor is low, but who cares? Who cares about the floor in that portion of the draft? Another player, and actually the next 2 players, because we're going to talk about 6 players today, even though it's a top 5 video, upside. That's the name of these players is upside. Tony Pollard, running back 48, roughly like the 12th, 13th round turn. And Pollard is one of the highest upside backups you can possibly find, whether it's as a handcuff if you already took Zeke, or just as a flyer if you didn't take Zeke and you're just trying to grab as many potential running back ones as possible. You want to be targeting him. You know, you want to target players on fantastic offenses. You know, like a guy like Raquel Armstead is fine, right? Because Fournette could get traded. Fournette could get hurt. And then Armstead steps in. But the Jaguars are also projected to be the worst team in the league this season. And so even if Armstead took over, how good's he really going to be? Like, probably not all that great. But the Cowboys are fantastic, right? So I don't care what you think about Pollard's talent. If he takes over for Zeke, you're starting him every single week. I mean, unless your team is absolutely incredible, you're starting Tony Pollard if he's the starting running back on the Cowboys. So for how late he's going in drafts, he's the perfect player you're grabbing as a handcuff and as a flyer. But another name that I don't think we've talked about too much is that same type of player, and that's Damien Harris. Now, the upside isn't as great. You know, like if you told me that Sony Michel and Zeke got injured, I want Pollard every day of the week. Like, I want both of them, but I much prefer Pollard. But Harris has plenty of upside too. You know, he was a very popular flyer last season, but he had 4 carries for 12 yards all year, and so now he finds himself in the 17th round. But it's not like the reason for drafting him has changed. Sony remains a massive injury risk with his knees. And now he's got this mystery foot surgery that he had in the offseason as well. And doctors have come out and said that they're more concerned about Sony's injury concerns going forward than they are with Gurley. So we make all this fuss about how Gurley is just going to fall apart. Doctors are more concerned about Sony Michel. So we should be too. And it's not like Burkhead and James White are a threat to take the majority of the early down work if Sony did get injured, right? Because Burkhead's 30 and he's never had more than 74 carries in a season. And he's got his own injury concerns as well. I mean, he gets injured a lot too. And I probably shouldn't need to explain to you that James White is never going to have a significant early down workload either. So an injury to Sony Michel means that Damien Harris is going to step in to the lead back role. And let's not forget how good he was in Alabama. I mean, he commanded more touches than Jacobs in all 3 years that he was playing with him, while being the more efficient runner in every single season. His yards per carry were always higher. So Pollard and Harris are 2 names that I would definitely just keep in the back of your minds late in drafts. If you're sitting there, you got 5 running backs, and you're like, you know what? Don't care about the floor. I don't care if this guy gets 4 carries this season like Harris did last year. I just want to find someone with upside. Those are 2 names you can go after. So those are 6 must-own second-year running backs this season. Remember, you can check out all of our rankings at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.